The contractions started while I was carrying a tray of dirty plates. I remember that detail more than anything else. Not the hospital, not the divorce papers, not even the moment I found out whose brother he was. I remember standing in the middle of a diner in Atlanta, 6 months pregnant with twins that weren't mine, feeling a pain rip across my stomach so hard I dropped a plate of half-eaten pancakes on a stranger's shoes. And in that moment, with syrup on some man's sneakers, and my knees threatening to buckle, I thought to myself, nobody is coming for me. Not the parents of these babies, not anyone. If I go down right now, in this diner, on this floor, I go down alone. That's where this story really starts. Not at the beginning. Right there, on my knees, in a diner, carrying 2 children that 2 different people had already decided they didn't want. If that gripped you even a little, if some part of you needs to know how I ended up on that floor, and more than that, how I got up, then stay with me. Hit subscribe before we go further, because I promise you, where this story goes next, you will not want to have missed the beginning. My name is Marilyn. And before I tell you about the twins, or the divorce, or the 2 brothers who turned my whole life inside out, I need you to understand who I was before any of it happened. Because none of what came next makes sense unless you know what I was running from, or maybe what I was still searching for. I was 7 years old the last time I saw my parents alive. We were flying home from my grandmother's funeral in Ohio. The irony of that isn't lost on me, even now. We were flying home from one funeral, and we never made it. The plane went down 11 minutes after takeoff. I don't remember much. I remember my mother's hand. I remember the sound before I remember the silence. And I remember waking up in a hospital with a nurse holding my hand instead of her. I was the only one who survived. My parents, my older brother, gone. And I was left behind, 7 years old, with nothing but a hospital bracelet and a name. What happened after that is what happens to a lot of kids who lose everything and have no family left to catch them. I went into the system. Foster home to foster home. 5 of them by the time I was 12. Some were fine. Some were just people collecting a check. None of them were mine, and I was never really theirs. You learn something when you grow up like that. You learn not to expect anyone to stay. You learn to pack light, emotionally and literally, because you never know when you'll be moved again. By 18, I aged out of the system the way you age out of anything nobody's fighting to keep you in. No family waiting. No home to return to on holidays. Just me, a duffel bag, and a list of shelters in case things didn't work out. Things didn't work out for a long time, but I'm stubborn. I think that's the one thing that plane crash gave me, whether I wanted it or not. I got a job waitressing at a little diner off Cascade Road, and somehow that job became the one steady thing in a life that had never had anything steady. I worked doubles. I saved what I could. I built a small apartment out of second-hand furniture and made it feel like mine, even though nothing in it had ever belonged to anyone who loved me first. And somewhere along the way, I heard about surrogacy. I won't pretend it was some noble calling. I needed the money. Waitressing tips don't exactly build a future. But if I'm honest with you, and I promised myself when I started telling this story that I would be honest, there was something else pulling me too. Something quieter. I think some small part of me wanted to witness what I never had, a family that wanted a child so badly they'd move mountains to have one. I wanted to stand close to that kind of love, even if it wasn't mine, even if I was just the vessel carrying it. That's how I met Jihoon and Sua Kwan. They came through an agency, polished, successful, the kind of couple that looks perfect in every photograph. Jihoon was a doctor, always in expensive coats, always checking his phone. Sua ran a design firm, elegant in a way that made me feel like I was wearing someone else's life whenever I stood next to her. They wanted twins, 2 embryos, 1 transfer, and if I'm being truthful, in our first meeting I remember thinking, These two are going to give their kids everything I never had. I didn't see the cracks at first. Why would I? I saw a beautiful home in the photos they showed me, a nursery already half painted, a mother who cried actual tears when we saw the heartbeats on the ultrasound. I told myself this was what a real family looked like. But you don't carry two people's hopes inside your body for 6 months without starting to notice things. Soo-ah stopped coming to appointments around month 4. Ji-hoon started coming alone, distracted, answering calls he wouldn't take in front of me. Once in the waiting room, I heard him on the phone saying, "I don't care anymore, Soo-ah. Do whatever you want." And then he saw me and hung up so fast the phone nearly slipped out of his hand. I told myself it was stress. I told myself a lot of things. If you've ever had a bad feeling you tried to talk yourself out of, you already know where this is going. By the time I was 6 months along, the Kwans stopped being the Kwans. Soo-ah filed for divorce in a courthouse 2 cities over, quietly, like she was trying to disappear before anyone noticed the marriage was already dead. And Ji-hoon, the man whose child I was carrying, whose biological child, half of 2 lives growing inside me, Ji-hoon sat across from me in a lawyer's office and told me, in the flattest voice I have ever heard a person use, that neither of them wanted to move forward with the arrangement. The arrangement. That's the word he used, like I was a business deal that had gone bad, not a woman 6 months pregnant with his children. I actually asked him, because some stubborn, stupid part of me thought there had to be an explanation. I asked him, "What happens to the babies, Ji-hoon?" And he looked at me, and for 1 second, just 1 second, I saw something that might have been guilt cross his face, and then it was gone. He said, "I can't do this right now, Marilyn. I'm sorry." And he left. That's it. That's how a man walks away from his own children before they've even taken a breath. I sat in that lawyer's office by myself for almost 20 minutes after he left. Nobody came to check on me. The receptionist eventually poked her head in and asked if I needed anything, and I remember laughing, actually laughing, this bitter, broken sound, because what I needed, nobody in that building could give me. If this story already has your chest tight, imagine living it. Drop a comment right now and tell me, "I'm still watching," because trust me, this is only the beginning of what I had to carry. I need to back up for a second, because there's a part of this I haven't told you yet, and it matters. Before Ji-hoon walked out of that lawyer's office, I asked him one more question. I asked him what Soo-ah had said about the babies, because surely, I thought, a mother doesn't just disappear like that. Surely there was some version of this story where she was fighting for them behind the scenes, where the divorce was between the 2 of them and had nothing to do with the twins at all. Ji-hoon's answer is something I still hear some nights when I can't sleep. He said, "Soo-ah told her lawyer she never really wanted children in the first place. She only agreed because I wanted them so badly." He said it flatly, like he was reading off a grocery list. And then he added, almost as an afterthought, "I think some part of me wanted them because I thought it would fix us." It didn't fix us. I sat with that for a long time after he left. 2 people had built an entire pregnancy. My body, my 9 months of nausea and swollen ankles and doctor's appointments, around fixing a marriage that was already broken before I ever signed a single form. I wasn't a surrogate to them. I was a Band-Aid, and when the wound underneath turned out to be too deep for any Band-Aid to cover, they simply peeled me off and walked away, leaving the mess behind for me to clean up. I want you to understand something about surrogacy contracts, because it matters to what happened next. When both intended parents walk away, the legal ground turns to quicksand. Nobody had planned for this. Not the agency, not the lawyers, not me. For a few terrifying weeks, I genuinely did not know who, if anyone, would have legal responsibility for the twins once they were born. I wasn't their biological mother. But apparently, in the eyes of the state, if nobody else stepped up, I might end up being the only name left on the birth certificate, whether I was ready for that or not. Let me tell you what 6 months pregnant with someone else's twins, working double shifts, and facing the possibility of raising 2 babies completely alone feels like. It feels like drowning in a pool where everyone can see you and nobody moves. I kept working. What else was I going to do? Bills didn't stop because my life had fallen apart. I waitressed until my feet swelled so badly I had to change shoe sizes twice. I picked up shifts other girls didn't want. I started quietly, and I mean quietly, because saying it out loud felt like admitting defeat, preparing a plan where it was just me and 2 babies against the world. Again. Because that's the story of my life, isn't it? Alone against the world. I remember one night in particular, close to the end of that 2nd month alone, when the weight of it all finally caught up with me. I'd worked a double, my back screaming, my ankles so swollen I had to sit on the floor of my apartment just to pull my shoes off. I sat there, on the cold linoleum, both hands on my stomach, and I said out loud, to no one, because there was no one there to hear it, I don't know how to do this. Not the pregnancy. Not the pregnancy. Not the birth. The after. The years and years of after. With no partner, no family, no safety net, just me, and whatever I could scrape together on a waitress's paycheck. I called an old friend from my last foster placement that night. One of the only people from that chapter of my life I'd stayed close to. I told her everything, the divorce, the abandonment, the fear crawling up my spine every time I thought about the hospital bill I hadn't figured out how to pay yet. She listened, and at the end she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "Marilyn, you've survived worse than this. You survived a plane crash. You survived every house that wasn't really a home. You are going to survive this too." I wanted to believe her. Some nights I did. Other nights I just sat on that linoleum floor until my legs went numb, too tired to even cry properly. There was a little restaurant near the diner where I sometimes went after my shifts, when I couldn't stomach the idea of going home to an empty apartment and my own thoughts. Korean-owned, small, warm, the kind of place where the owner remembers your order after the 2nd visit. That's where I met Jae-hoon. He didn't know anything about me at first. I was just a tired, pregnant woman who came in most nights and ordered the same bowl of noodles because it was the only thing that didn't make me nauseous. He'd bring it out himself sometimes, ask how I was doing, and one night, I don't even know why I told him, I just started crying at the counter. 6 months pregnant, exhausted, humiliated, and this stranger just stood there and let me cry without trying to fix it, or rush me, or make it weird. He just said, "You don't have to explain anything to me. Just eat something warm first." I want you to remember that line, because it matters more later than it seems right now. Jae-hoon became the person I looked forward to seeing, not because he was trying to be anything to me. He never pushed, never asked more than I offered, but because for the first time in months, someone showed up for me without needing anything back. He'd save me a seat by the window. He started remembering not just my order, but how my day had gone, whether my ankles were swollen, whether I'd eaten lunch at all. Small things. The kind of things nobody had ever bothered doing for me before. I found out later that he'd left his family's business in Korea years earlier, some falling out he never went into detail about. Something about not wanting to live the life that was expected of him. He built the restaurant from nothing, on his own, 3,000 miles from home. I understood that kind of loneliness. I think that's why we understood each other so easily. 2 people who'd built their own lives out of the wreckage of what they were supposed to have. There was one evening, around month 6, that I think about more than almost any other. It had rained hard that day, and I'd walked to the restaurant soaked through because I couldn't afford another rideshare that week. Jae-hoon took one look at me dripping in the doorway and, without a word, disappeared into the back and came out with a dry apron, and an old jacket he kept for cold nights closing up. He draped it over my shoulders like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, like taking care of a pregnant stranger was just part of running a restaurant. It wasn't ordinary. Nobody had done something that simple, that unasked for me and longer than I could remember. He sat with me while I ate that night, which he almost never did during the dinner rush, and I asked him why he left Korea, why he built a whole life on the other side of the world instead of staying close to his family. He was quiet for a moment, turning a chopstick over in his hands, and then he said, "My father wanted me to run the family business the way Ji-hoon eventually did. Everyone expected it. I think I left because I was tired of being the version of myself other people had already decided on before I ever got a say." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, "I think that's part of why I understand you a little. You've spent your whole life with people deciding things about your future without asking you first." I didn't say anything, I just nodded, because he was right, and because it was the first time in years someone had seen that part of me without me having to explain it first. By month 7, I looked forward to seeing him more than I looked forward to anything else in my life. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I had 2 babies coming and no business falling for anyone. But some feelings don't ask permission. Then one evening, he was closing up the restaurant, and I was the last one there, and he sat down across from me, which he never did. He was always standing, always working, and he said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, "You've seen me cry into noodles twice this month. I think we're past personal." He almost smiled. Then he asked me about the baby's father. Not out of jealousy. I could tell that wasn't it. Just concern, the kind of question someone asks when they're starting to care about what happens to you. And I told him. All of it. The surrogacy, the divorce, being abandoned mid-pregnancy by a man who called his own children the arrangement. I watched his face change while I talked. Not sympathy, something else. Something closer to recognition, and then something closer to dread. He asked me the father's name. I said Ji-hoon, Ji-hoon Kwon. I have never in my life seen color drain from someone's face that fast. He didn't say anything for what felt like an entire minute. Then he said, very quietly, "Ji-hoon is my brother." I want you to sit with that for a second, the way I had to sit with it. Because I didn't understand at first. I actually laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke, some coincidence with the surname, because Kwon isn't exactly a rare name. But he wasn't laughing. He pulled out his phone with hands that weren't quite steady and showed me a photo. 2 brothers, younger, standing outside a restaurant in Seoul, arms around each other, both of them smiling like nothing in the world could ever come between them. I recognized Ji-hoon immediately. Older, colder now, but it was him. I don't know how to describe what happened inside me in that moment. It was like the floor of my life, which had already been ripped out from under me once, got ripped out a second time. The man I had let myself feel safe with, the man whose noodle shop had become the only place I didn't feel alone. He was the brother of the man who abandoned his own children inside my body. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor loud enough that a couple at the next table looked over. "I need to go," I blurted out. "Marilyn, wait, I didn't know," he said, trying to grab my hands, but I was quick to pull them away. "I swear to you I didn't know your name until tonight," he added. "That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you knew. You're still his blood," I replied, and then I left. 7 months pregnant, walking too fast for my own good, tears blurring the streetlights, feeling like the universe had played the cruelest joke it possibly could on a woman who had already lost everything once before. If you've ever had the ground disappear from under you twice in one lifetime, you understand exactly what I felt walking home that night. And if this story is making your heart race the way mine was racing that night, hit that like button right now, because what happens next is the part that changes everything. I didn't go back to the restaurant for 2 weeks. I told myself I was done, done with the Quan name entirely, done with anything or anyone connected to it. I focused on getting ready for the twins, on picking up whatever shifts my body could still handle, on trying to build some kind of nursery out of hand-me-downs and thrift store furniture in a one-bedroom apartment that was never designed to hold 2 cribs. But Jaehoon didn't disappear. He didn't chase me the way some men do, loud and demanding, forcing their way back into a space they weren't welcome in anymore. He was patient in a way that undid me more than any grand gesture could have. He left food at my door some evenings, not with a note, not asking for anything, just a container of the noodles I liked, with a sticky note that said things like, "Eat something warm," or "Hope you and the babies are okay today." No pressure, no demands, just quiet, consistent proof that he was still there, even when I'd told him to leave. 3 weeks before my due date, my body gave me no choice but to let someone back in. I was alone in my apartment when my water broke. 5 weeks early, both babies flipped the wrong way, everything happening faster and more violently than any of the birthing classes I'd taken by myself had prepared me for. I called an ambulance with shaking hands, and somewhere between the pain and the panic, I called Jaehoon too. I don't fully know why. Maybe because in that moment, terrified and about to give birth to 2 children that half the world had already abandoned, his was the only name that felt like it meant safety. He beat the ambulance to my apartment. I remember him kneeling next to me on that kitchen floor, holding my hand the exact same way. I would learn much later. My mother had held it on that plane 20-some years earlier. He kept saying, "You're not doing this alone. I'm right here. You're not doing this alone," over and over, like he needed to say it as much as I needed to hear it. The twins were born that night at 11:47 and 11:52, 5 minutes apart, both of them small, both of them screaming into a hospital room that had exactly one person in it who had shown up for them on purpose. Jaehoon, not their father, not their mother. A man who 3 weeks earlier I had walked out on because of a last name he never chose. I named them myself. In a haze of exhaustion and love I didn't know a body could still make room for after everything it had been through. A boy and a girl. I won't tell you their names. Some things I want to keep for myself, and for them, and not for the internet. But I will tell you that when the nurse placed them in my arms for the first time, something inside me that had been broken since I was 7 years old on that airplane finally, quietly, started to heal. That should have been the end of it. A woman, alone no more, building a life with 2 children, and a man who had chosen to show up. But this story isn't finished yet, because 2 days after the twins were born, Jaehoon walked into my hospital room. I want you to imagine my face in that moment. I want you to imagine the exhaustion, the fresh stitches, the 2 newborns finally sleeping after hours of crying, and then the door opening to reveal the man who had called his own children the arrangement, standing there in an expensive coat, looking like he hadn't slept in days either. He didn't ask about the babies first. That's the detail that told me everything I needed to know about why he'd really come. He looked at me, not at the bassinets, at me, and he said, "I heard you and my brother have been spending time together." "That's none of your business, Jaehoon." I fired at him. "It is when it's my family," he replied. I laughed. I actually laughed, in a hospital room, 48 hours postpartum, because the audacity of that sentence coming out of his mouth was almost too much to process. Family. This man who had abandoned 2 children before they were even born was standing in front of me talking about family like it was a word he had any right to use. He tried a different approach then. He sat down, uninvited, in the chair beside my bed, and his voice softened into something I recognized from the earliest days of our arrangement, back when he was still trying to be the man in those glossy nursery photos. He talked about how the divorce had broken something in him, how he'd made mistakes he was still trying to understand, how watching his brother, his own brother, step into a life he himself had run from, had forced him to confront things about himself he'd been avoiding for years. And then he said the thing I never expected. He said, "I don't want to fight you for the children, Marilyn. I'm not here for that." He paused, and something in his face cracked open in a way I hadn't seen since that first ultrasound, all those months ago. "I'm here because I think I made the biggest mistake of my life, walking away from you. Not just the arrangement, you. If you have not felt your stomach drop the way mine did in that hospital bed, I don't know how else to make you understand this moment. Because the man who fathered these children, who left me pregnant and alone, who I had every reason in the world to hate, was sitting beside my hospital bed offering me something that looked, on the surface, like the complete family I never had growing up. Their real father, back in the picture, one name for everyone. A story that could have ended the way a fairy tale is supposed to end. And for one terrifying, honest moment, I considered it. Not because I loved him. I want to be clear about that, because I've thought about this moment 1,000 times since, and I need you to understand it the way I understood it that night. I considered it because some 7-year-old part of me, the part that lost her whole family on an airplane and spent the rest of her childhood being moved from house to house, wanted so badly to give my children the one thing I never had, a mother and a father under one roof, sharing one name, never having to explain a fractured family to anyone. I considered it because I was terrified that choosing Jae-hoon meant choosing a complicated, unconventional shape of family instead of the clean, simple one Ji-hoon was suddenly offering. I asked him to give me time. He left his number, kissed the top of my head, which I flinched away from, and walked out. And I sat there in that hospital bed with 2 sleeping newborns and a decision in front of me that felt bigger than anything I had ever had to face. This is the most intense part of the whole story, and if you've made it this far, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't already, because the ending of this story is not what you're expecting, and you do not want to miss it. I didn't call Jae-hoon that night. I couldn't. I didn't know what I would even say to him. Your brother wants me back, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to say no. Felt like a betrayal even to think, let alone speak out loud to the one person who had shown up for me and my children without being asked, without any obligation, without a single drop of blood connecting him to either of those babies. For 3 days, I sat with that decision the way you sit with a stone in your shoe, feeling it with every single step. I watched my daughter's fingers wrap around mine and thought about what it would mean to give her a father who already had a documented history of walking away when things got hard. I watched my son sleep and thought about the man who had held my hand on my kitchen floor while I screamed through contractions, a man with absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose by staying. On the 4th day, Jae-hoon came to the hospital. He didn't know about Ji-hoon's visit. I hadn't told him, and I think some coward part of me hoped I wouldn't have to. But you can't hide something like that from a man who's been paying attention to your face for months. He took one look at me and said, "Something happened. Tell me." So I told him. All of it. Ji-hoon's visit, the apology, the offer of the complete family, the terrifying moment I actually considered it. I watched Jae-hoon's face while I spoke, and I braced myself. For anger, for hurt, for him to walk out the way everyone in my life eventually walked out. He didn't walk out. He sat down on the edge of my hospital bed, took my hand, and he said something I will remember until the day I die. "Marilyn," he began quietly, "I'm not going to compete with my brother for you. I'm not going to stand here and list every reason why I'm better than him, because you already know the reasons. You lived them." He paused, and his voice shook a little, which was the first time I had ever seen him anything less than steady. "But I need you to ask yourself one question before you decide anything, not who can give you the family you always dreamed of on paper. Ask yourself who was actually there. not who apologized after the fact. Who showed up before anybody asked him to? I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just cried. The good kind of crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and true, not the kind born out of exhaustion or grief. He kept going. He said his brother had spent his whole life being handed things, the family business, the easy path, the approval nobody had ever given Jae-hoon for choosing his own life instead. He said Ji-hoon's apology, as real as it might have felt in that moment, was still about what Ji-hoon needed, not about what the twins needed, not about what I needed. He's not offering you a family, he continued. He's offering you a way to fix his own guilt. There's a difference. And you know there's a difference, because you've spent your whole life able to tell when someone actually wants you, and when they're just trying to make themselves feel better. That line hit something in me I didn't even know was still raw. Because he was right. My whole childhood had been a parade of people who took me in because it was their job, not because they wanted me. I knew the difference between obligation and love, the way some people know the difference between salt and sugar, just by looking at them. And looking at Jae-hoon in that hospital room, holding my hand, having shown up on a kitchen floor at midnight with nothing to gain, I finally let myself see clearly what I had been too scared to say out loud. I called Ji-hoon 2 days later. I told him I appreciated that he'd found the courage to apologize, and that I hoped, for his own sake, he kept doing the work that apology suggested he was capable of. But I told him I wasn't going to build a family on the foundation of guilt. I told him the twins would know who their biological father was. I wasn't going to hide that truth from them, because I, of all people, know what it feels like to grow up with unanswered questions about where you come from. But I told him that being their father on paper didn't make him their father in any way that mattered, and that if he wanted a real place in their lives, it would have to be earned slowly, honestly, over years, not handed to him because he showed up in a hospital room with the right words at the right time. He tried at first to argue with me. You're choosing my brother over me because he was convenient, because he was there? He asked. That's not the same as choosing what's right for the kids, he added. And I told him, as calmly as I could manage, though my hands were shaking around the phone, that convenience and consistency are not the same thing, and if he genuinely believed showing up every single day for months, with nothing to gain, was somehow lesser than showing up once with an apology and an offer, then he had learned nothing at all from losing us in the first place. I told him the twins didn't need a father who thought love was a competition he could win with the right speech. They needed one who understood love was something you built brick by brick, on ordinary days, when nobody was watching, and nothing was being offered in return. He didn't take it well. There was anger in his voice, then something that sounded almost like relief, like some part of him had known all along that this offer was never going to be accepted, and some part of him was grateful not to have to follow through on it. I don't know what happened to Ji-hoon after that conversation. I've heard, through Jae-hoon, that he's tried, in small ways, to be present, birthday cards, the occasional visit, slow and imperfect steps toward being something to these children beyond the man whose name is on a birth certificate. I hope that's true. I hope, for the twins' sake more than mine, that he keeps trying. But the family I built, the one my children actually grew up inside, that family started on a kitchen floor with a man who had no obligation to be there at all. I remember hanging up the phone after that call and sitting in silence for a long time, waiting to feel regret, waiting for some part of me to panic that I had just closed a door that could have given my children a normal family. But the regret never came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Steadiness. Like I had finally stopped running on instinct and fear, and started making a choice from someplace solid inside myself. Jae-hoon and I didn't rush anything after that. We didn't need some dramatic movie moment to make it official. We had already lived through enough drama to last several lifetimes. We built it slowly, the way you build anything that's meant to last. He was there for the twins' first steps. He was there the night my daughter spiked a fever so high we sat in the emergency room until dawn, both of us too scared to speak, holding hands in plastic chairs the way we had once held hands on my kitchen floor. He learned how to braid hair he'd never braided before, because my daughter wanted braids like the girls at daycare, and he sat there for 40 minutes the first time, getting it wrong over and over, refusing to give up. There were hard days, too. In those early years, I don't want to make it sound like everything after that hospital room was easy, because it wasn't. There were nights the twins wouldn't stop crying, and we were both so exhausted we snapped at each other over things that didn't matter. There was a stretch, when the twins were almost 2, when money got so tight between the restaurant's slow season and my reduced hours, that we sat at the kitchen table doing math on the back of a receipt, both of us scared in a way neither of us said out loud. But even in those moments, there was never a night he didn't come home. There was never a fight so bad it made either of us wonder if the other one might leave. That, more than anything, is what made it different from everything I'd known before. Hard did not mean unstable. Hard just meant we were building something real, and real things take work. He adopted them, eventually, legally, officially, with all the paperwork that makes something like that real in the eyes of the world. I remember sitting in that courtroom, watching a judge ask him if he understood the full weight of what he was choosing, and watching him answer without a single second of hesitation. I thought about my own childhood in that moment, every home that was temporary, every family that was assigned rather than chosen, and I thought about my children, who would never once have to wonder if the people raising them actually wanted them there. That's the thing I understood, finally, standing in that courtroom with 2 toddlers holding my hands. Family was never about whose blood ran through anyone's veins. It was never about matching last names or a story that folds up neatly at the end. It was about who stayed. It was about who showed up on a kitchen floor at midnight with no obligation and no guarantee, and simply refused to leave. I spent my whole childhood waiting for someone to choose me and mean it. I found that, finally, not in the family I was born into, and not in the family I was promised by the people who created my children, but in a man who walked into a diner life he never asked for, and decided, one bowl of noodles at a time, that he was staying anyway. If this story moved you even a fraction of how much it meant to live it, I need you to do one last thing before you go. Subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like this one waiting for you. Like this video if it made you feel something you didn't expect to feel today. And comment below and tell me, who in your life showed up for you when they didn't have to? I read every single one, and I promise you, your story matters just as much as mine. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I'll see you in the next one.